alarme aux armes citoyens, stupéfacients, esti de toxin, on va arrêter ça tout de suite. So, alarm to armed citizen, is it not so fucking annoying, a stupid toxin? So, I'm going to stop it right now and show who I am, even though I'm not showing who I am, it's just a camera. Yeah, cats are making trouble. Anyway, it's gonna be the very same thing as the part one. Today I'm going to read from Money, the Master Key, part two, starting in chapter three. So if you missed the first part, I suggest you go back one video on my channel, and probably it's going to be published to the SRPC channel as well. Donc aujourd'hui et maintenant et tout de suite, j'enregistre la partie 2 de Money de Keymaster. J'invite les gens à apprendre l'anglais, à l'écouter ou de partager, à faire n'importe quoi. Mais ça va être en anglais parce que le bouquin que je lis est en anglais. So I'm going to switch back immediately to English. Donc je vais y aller tout de suite en anglais. In the first part, we have learned that this is sound money. Silver and of course gold and platinum and all those precious metal because of the work that there is behind and not because of the face value. We've also learned that this is fiat currency, which is worth absolutely fucking nothing, and we can print it out of thin air and out of debt, which is absolutely unrepayable, effectively rendering us all slave of a system that we cannot get out of unless we tear it to parts. This is, in fact, I don't want to say the goal, but what we've learned through this process of reading part one. I'm going to drop this, and so you can see we're right here now. Chapter three, taking it back where we started. Hopefully, we're going to learn some stuff in there, but in short, things we've also learned that the Bank of England was taken over by international corporation, which I've already knew on a personal point of view or standing, and that freedom is impossible in a system of slavery or based on slavery. So if you've ever put value into money, the value that you've put in are in the wrong spot. I tell you that. And if you think that money is going to save your head in the end, well, you have got a double problem because even though you would get million, you would still not be in the big club, as the late George Carlin said. So yeah, it's a big club and you ain't in it. So with that, without further ado, and with that being said, I'd like to say hello and goodbye to the Rothschild, which in fact are named Bauer, which have sold us all as their little slave, because there's a minority of us and a majority. There's a minority of you and a majority of us. As soon as the fucking idiot controller who think they have stake in the game can solve anything by having million, well, when they've end up coming for us, they're gonna come for you because you're still slave, even if you're a slave master. So enough of me. Let's get into it. So chapter 3, what is the way out? So still reading from the master key, Money, the master key. What is the way out? Worldwide is a struggle for change, for a remedy, and that's not even past news. It is very actual. We have fascism, Nazism, communism, socialism, free trade, economic nationalism, I protectionist. Almost everyone you meet consider himself a reformer and as his little set of change which he think would redeem the world. A difficulty one encounter is this: just what is fascism, communism, etc.? Exactly how has Hitler achieved his remarkable result? How Mussolini is? What is the secret of communism's strength? Those questions it seems hard to get most men to discuss calmly and constructively. Any such question, it is far from our province in this little work to consider it. It does seem, in order to observe, however, that even a dictator in Canada or in the United States, unless he had a genuine change of system, would get us nowhere. In Canada, it appeared to be true that all the change advocated could be grouped into three main classes. First, modification of tariff and trade agreement, what we call the old line parties, liberal and conservative, profess to believe in these. One is obliged to conclude that such people think that international trade will remove all ills. They forget, it seems, that their policy has put us into our present morass of hopelessness. Again, Canada has 9 provinces, which was there true then true now 10. Sorry about that. United States has over 45 states. Among them, they produce most things they need. If trade would solve our ill, why do the state not solve theirs? And I'll answer that question because trading, international trading, is a sum-zero game. It's actually a negative effect game. Anyway, that's my comment. Resume the book. I said no comment, so that I will allow only that one for me. Why do the province not solve theirs? They could have among themselves absolute free trade or any degree of protection. Why not? Government seeking to apply the theory and practice of international trade encounter some real contradiction. 1. Under the present system, each country must have a favorable trade balance, that is, it must sell or export more good and service than it buys or import. How can, say, 40 nations carry on, each one selling more than it buys? Manifestly, it is impossible. Exactly what I was saying. The struggle for market caused the loser in the strife to go to the wall rather than do so they fight. Thus, war result. 2. If some nation produce all primary product such as wool, wheat, meat, wood, coal, while other produce all manufactured or secondary commodities such as sweater, flour, lumber, machine, then we could see how the primary producers, such as Canada, Australia, and South Africa, where 75 years ago might trade indefinitely with manufacturing countries such as were England and Germany. A. But the first obstacle was noticed when man began to realize that all primary products were sold on unsheltered market while secondary products were sold on sheltered market. Thus, the primary producer, farmer, fishermen, and others, were unable to raise and sell enough to pay for the manufactured good they had to buy. Hence, the primary producing country inevitably tended to fall into debt to manufacturing country with whom they traded. It was increasingly difficult to have favorable trade balance. Then, the primary producing country like Canada began to manufacture textiles, shoes, machinery, etc. themselves, because this gave employment, on market, and new export, and because it helped to cut down necessary import. The government began to raise tariff wall against outside manufacturers. This soon developed a large population of persons who profited from the protected industry. These people became the wealthiest section of the electorate. They therefore controlled whatever party was in power. Every duty restricted trade. Here was the second obstacle. C. Difficulty number 3 then put in its appearance. While manufacturing country like England found much of their former market for textile and other commodity disappearing, Canada and other fabricating their own. England had to export one way or another nearly as much value in price as she imported it. She could not go on buying Canadian wheat, meat, wool, etc. indefinitely and selling Canada less. She therefore had to begin protecting her primary industry, her agriculture. Other manufacturing nations had to do the same. Trade was yet more difficult. D. The Great War brought into being another nation realized that it was bad for a country at war to be unable to produce what it needed. If Germany could cut off from England Canadian wheat, England might starve. Each nation began feverishly striving for self-sufficiency. It protected and helped, by quota, subsidy, and other device, industry which perhaps in that nation were economically not paying proposition. trade was harder. Another factor accelerated by the Great War was overproduction, so-called. Canada, for example, spared approximately 500,000 of her best producers to stand in battle array. Somehow she did without them producing enough goods and service not only to keep them supplied but also to feed, clothe, and shelter her other citizens in considerable prosperity, even though many of her home citizens were manufacturing armament good that her people would not consume. The world learned to produce more than it could use, at least more than it could buy. Thus, vast surplus of such commodity as sugar threatened the markets. In this way, if Canada sold her wheat, butter, cheese, wool, etc., she had to outmaneuver other countries having these commodities for sale. Trade prospect grew dimmer. F. Yet another stumbling block should be noted. Much of the foreign trade had been rendered possible by foreign loan. If the United States wished to sell agri- agricultural implement or other product to South American Republic, for instance, she loaned those customer credit. With these, they bought her good, and for these, her company sold. And for these, yeah. Business was a brisk and everybody was happy. But the time for repayment arrived. What could Argentina, for example, return to the United States? Only goods or service or gold. But what goods? Cattle, wheat, wool? All of these the United States likely had more than she needed. Gold, in most cases, the debtor of nation could not get because United States and France already had enormous portion of the world's holding. What then? South American Republic could not pay. Loan that you know cannot get back are not made with enthusiasm. Foreign lending is more and more impracticable. Except for war preparation, the outlook for trade become decreasingly bright. These are but a few of the hardships in the way of foreign trade. We all, of course, want all the market we can get, but to hope for any combination of tariff and trade treaty to cure the malady we have in the forepart of this chapter glanced at require either ignorance, stupidity, or unjustifiable optimism. Second, varying degrees of government ownership and centralized control coupled with a more or less thorough-going policy of sharing the wealth of the country. Such proposed the socialists. The underlying idea appeared to be that there is money enough if it were evenly distributed then. Eliminate or at least greatly restrict profit then. Abolish big income, divide up the national income equitably. Such would appear to be in the main of the proposal of the various type of socialism. In Canada, the Canadian Cooperative Commonwealth Federation and the communist element might, with accuracy perhaps, be mentioned as exponent of socialistic doctrine in modification or combination. To make a nationalization proposal concrete, let us again turn to the motor block industry mentioned earlier. Suppose that the government took over that automobile factory, then let us reason. 1. Where would the government get the money to run it? Would be the first embarrassing question. The government would take over the banking system, might be the reply. Then would the government, through the bank, give money to the factory management or would it merely lend it? If it gave the money, then soon enough the present reserve of the bank would be exhausted. Would the government then give the saving of the people also to industry? If the government merely loaned the money, would it require interest? How long would it allow the loan to run? In what respect would its policy differ from the policy now pursued by the banking system? If the government required interest, then the factory would have to make a profit. Again, would the government through the banking system create new money? If so, would it create currency or credit or both? And how much of each? And how would it be able to judge when to stop in order to prevent inflation? Now, if the government would propose to loan only, much as is done at present, could it not completely control the industry through the bank alone, much as these institutions at present control industry? Then why own the industry outright? 2. The next question for the new management would be, how will you sell your surplus good? Could the government sell the motor block better than the present official can? If so, why? Can the state-owned CNR, which stands for Canadian National Railway, sell its ticket more successfully than can the company-owned CPR? 3. Then we should have to demand, how is the government going to put the 231 men to work? Can the Canadian National use more men per 100 mile than the CPR? Well, I fancy someone retorts, the state would cut down the hours. Suppose it does, then what? Let the hour be reduced from 8 to 4. Then you would have 2 times 19 or 38 of your original 250 men at work. At the same time, you would reduce a day's income from 8 times 75 cents to 4 times 75 cents, from $6 to $3 a day. Have you enabled your workmen as a whole to buy more good? Clearly not. You would increase wage? Very well. If you gave your men $1.25 or $1.50 an hour, then what? You would increase that cost of your plant, increasing the price of your goods. Has that helped your government to sell them? Your progress with the unemployment is, I fear, not yet very gratifying. 4. But there is another annoying question. How is the new system to put into the hand of those 231 men an amount of purchasing power relatively equal to the $1,700 a year they lost? We will build great public work, someone replied. Quite so. Where will you get the money? Will you seize it, borrow it, tax it, or create it? If you do not create it, do you suppose the government will have much money to spare after it finances all the mine, factory, farm, etc. necessary? It is doubtful. And the more one examines the statistics of Canada's economy, the more doubtful it looks. Then, how can you devise public work of sufficient variety and of wide enough distribution to put all the dispossessed to work? How will you transport a convalescing teacher recovering from nerve strain? How will you take him to a road camp, provide his keep while there, and leave him enough to support his family for a year? You will give pension, state medicine, allowance. Yes, but if you do not create money, where will it come from? And even if you put a $6 per day man into a road camp, will you pay him $6 per day? And if you send him there, will you use man, horse, and scraper, or will you use the superb road building machine of today, each displacing man by score? If you set about constructing public building, will you use machine or man? I read as I write these words. Digging a sewer job 4 block in length employed 40 men for 90 days in 1914. Steam and 10 men for 3 weeks in 1938. If you would discard these machines, why? If you should use them, Where will you get the money to buy enough of them to put your hundreds of thousands of men to work? Before leaving the general's leaving the general subject, two other questions ought to be disposed of. First, how will you encourage men to do their best? What manager of a factory or an institution would assume the burden of worry and annoyance incident to his position and accept the mediocre income of a workman down in the rank who meet no such irritating experience? What government employee would, even if he could, put in the long, anxious, drudging hour that a farmer holding his own will devote to his farm just to make it go? Second, how will you support and discipline the tremendous army of civil servants needed to supervise and to effect the economy of a state owning its own industry? Can a democracy possibly use and apply such a system? Perhaps. 6. Finally, would you have the state take over all the sugar factory, for example? Would the state assume the loss of those not now going into the red? Enough of such would lose money for the country, not make it. And how about the taxes? Would you have the state-owned and the state-supported industry pay tax to their owner? And if they were going to lose money in a given year, who would make the taxes good? Honestly, the further one investigates such proposals, the less attractive do they appear. Third, monetary reform. There are a number of people who believe that in our money system lies the root of our trouble and that through reform of our monetary and financial system lies the way out. Among these are the new economy advocate and the social credit movement. To be able to appraise the contention of these reformers, one must know money well. Of that matter, much more will be said during the succeeding page. To meet the need of our situation, certainly it does seem that we must somehow get more and more money. As we operate the present system, we act as though men could obtain money only by taxing or borrowing. If these two be the only way, then the outlook is dark indeed. But are they the only way? Monetary reformers do not believe it. History, they say, does not show it. Neither does common sense. Money, they urge, has been and is now being created. In fact, new money must be created regularly as productive power grows. They point to such statement as Carl Snyder to the effect that production increase about 3% a year compounded annually. Now, the more goods and service a people can produce and exchange, the more money they require to exchange these. In 1834, the American people had $12.35 per man, woman, and child. In 1930, they were using 515.33 per capita. It was all good American money created in the USA. Most of it was created by banker and claimed by banker greatly to their profit. Is it not possible, and would it not be safe for the state to create new such money? New economist query. If it would be shown to be both possible and safe, then the creation of new money might offer a practical way out. They contend that through properly managing money, the government could so supervise the economic system that the community could gain from it in the greatest advantage with the greatest efficiency. They argue that national money can be used to pay off national debt. They believe that the state can, by wisely placing loan, bring about any amount of production it desires, so long as its resources are ample. That such loan would bring into employment a majority of the present jobless people, absorbing them naturally just as they used to be absorbed before machine displaced them. Canadians now can have a very high standard of living, monetary reformer argues, if they can be unable to buy what the country's resource can produce. The wage paid out to worker in this new burst of productivity would go so far toward providing purchase power to buy the goods. What goods could not thus be bought could be moved by means of purchasing power, definitely put into people's possession. Monetary reformers have to meet objection to their ideas such as number one, issuing state money has been tried time and again. John Law's money, the assignat of France, the American greenback, Germany's abandoned mark in 1923. Always the experiment had led to inflation. Can you show that it would not do the same again? It's too great of a risk. Money, or number two, money to be of value must be made of gold or be backed by gold. How can you make your money have any value? 3. The only other thing that gives money value is its scarcity. You will make dollars so plentiful that they will not be worth picking up. 4. The great money illusion is the belief that money is wealth. You cannot increase a country's wealth by merely printing dollar bill. Wealth consists of goods and services. You have merely become the victim of a great illusion, just as other often before you have done. 5. Your plan might work under a dictatorship, but it requires too much regimentation for a democracy. Human nature is too weak. 6. You cannot entrust a nation's money to any government, especially in a democracy. The party in power would create money in vast quantity and would corrupt the whole electorate and destroy our money. 7. New money is just a form of tax. Prices go up so far that people have to pay just as much in extra cost as if the whole of the amount created had been taken from them in sales tax or other levy. 8. Your money will fall in value in the world's eyes, therefore the exchange will be against you, greatly impairing your trade. 9. If there were anything of value in your idea, England would have applied them long ago. You can't get something for nothing. A formidable array of hurdles to be leaped. They all pertain to money and our financial system. It will be our interest in the page which follow to find what light the fact will shed upon these arguments. Such will help us to see whether through money lies the way out. Chapter 4. A few money truths illustrated. The writer remembers his own difficulty when, less than 10 years ago, he commenced to concentrate on the money maze, will endeavor to illustrate the financial reality sufficiently clearly and concretely to enable anyone to grasp the essential. What is money? Of course, the first essential is to know what money is. Let us go back to the history of money. Thousands of years ago, we would find the situation somewhat as follows. There would be a man with cow. Not far away would be another man with grain. The Mr. Grain man approached Mr. Cowman, saying, let me sell you some of my grain. I would like to buy, replied Mr. Cowman, but I have nothing to pay you with. Will you take a cow? Sorry, rejoined his neighbor, but I have to carry on and get rid of the rest of this grain. A cow would get in my way. I have it, exclaimed Mr. Cowman. I will make a little leather tag, and on it I will put a cow's head and also my private mark. You will leave the grain and take the tag. When you are ready for the cow, bring the tag back to me, and the cow is yours, for the cow stands behind the tag. Agreed, said the grain man as he leaves. The grain pocket the cow, the tag or claim on her, and goes his way. In the due time, having disposed of most of his grain, he has collected in his pocket a whole herd of cow, little letter tag that stands for cow, that is, that are claims on cow. By and by he comes to a maker of shawls. Wishing one of these for his wife, he offers some grain for one. What would I do with grain? Inquired the shawl man. I will give you a cow for one then. Yes, yes, affirmed Mr. Grainman as he take forth a leather tag, saying, You see that mark on this tag? That's Jim Jackson's private mark. He is the fellow that lives by the fore, you know. You take this tag to him and he will give you a cow, for one of his cows stand behind this tag. Settle, said the shawl man, turning over a shawl for a tag. In time he present his tag to Jim Jackson and receive his cow. Even today we use the word pecuniary coming from the Latin pecu, meaning cattle. This little story actually was lived through many times. Now when Jim Jackson made that little tag, he made something that enabled him to sell his cow, the grain man to sell his grain, the shawl man to sell his shawl, each of the three to buy the thing he needed. He made a medium of exchange, a medium of distribution. He created money. Experienced student will add, money is a standard of value, the means of measuring a debt, the mean of repaying a debt, etc. To them I say yes, by and by we can study advanced money theory, but for now this definition is good enough. The little leather tag was the currency in that far off neighborhood, what gives money value. How many tags could Jim Jackson make? Naturally as many as he had cow, of course. Partly right. But some cow may die, stray away, or be stolen. Allowing for all such possibility, we might say that if Jimmy Jackson had 13 cow, for example, he could safely create 10 tag, which he might trade off for coal, lumber, sheep, land, shoes, fruit, or any other good his district is producing. These tags would go circulating among the people for many weeks, perhaps even months. In time, however, each would return to its maker and find awaiting it a cow goods. This made it a good tag, sound money. Meanwhile, the grain man, having for example 13 cow worth of grain, could also create 10 tag bag backed by his good. And the shawl man, supposing he had 13 cows worth of shawl, could create 10 shawl bag tag. Thus, in our little community, there would be 30 tag bagged by cow, grain, and shawls, each a good tag, sound money. Not because it was made of gold, silver, or banker's paper, not because it was backed by one of these either directly or indirectly, but because it was backed by plenty of good. This conclusion requires some elaboration to allow for the influence of other factors. Modifying element will receive attention in their appropriate place. Notwithstanding any and all of these, let the important vital truth be realized. Fundamentally, what gives money value is the good that backs it. What weakens its value? In those bygone times, such currency served well until a sharper, conceiving a bright idea, made a leather tag and sold one of Jim Jackson's cow. That was serious for several reasons, the chief of which was this, that in time, if the practice went on, there would be 14 cow tag for the 13 cow, more tag than there were cows. Before long, a tag would return and find no cow to back it readily. Men would therefore begin to lose confidence in the cow's tag. The shawl man would demand more of them for a shawl, or he would require a bonus. Thus, price would rise. That is, there would be inflation. Inflation. Inflation, which all opponent of monetary reform trot out every time anyone breathes a word about increasing a country's money supply, means broadly speaking having more money, tags, circulating, coming into the market or demanding good, than there are goods and service for it to buy without rise of the price. This statement again need elaboration, for there are several possible causes of the rise in price. The chief of these influences we shall deal with sufficiently in their place. This very important money truth, however, stands: inflation arises from having more dollar coming into market than there are good and service there. Community creation of money. Meanwhile, let us go on with our tag story. The producer, sensing the danger which too many tags might induce, met and resolved to take precaution regarding tag making. They appointed a committee to make all tags for them. Each tag was to carry some definite mark, easy to recognize, hard to imitate. The number made was to be enough, not too many. Let us call the group the Monetary Committee. Now, if you were on that board for any community, what is the first thing you would want to know? Naturally, you say, I must learn how many cow, pigs, vegetable, coal mine, etc. there are available for use, how much fruit, grain, clothing, and the like to community as for sale, the community as for sale, or coming up on the market. Money, not necessarily debt. Let us imagine you and I are member of the tag community in our story. We soon learn that we can create 10 cows tag, 10 grains tag, 10 shawls tag, which we proceed to do. Is there any conceivable reason why the committee should owe anyone for the tags? Clearly not. If the cowman choose to pay us something like a piece of meat or a bit of butter for our work, well and good. But surely everyone's common sense back in those realistic days would tell him that the committee was able to create the tag only because of the Jackson's cow, the grainsman grain, etc. The tag therefore belonged to them and to the other producer of the neighborhood. Why interest? Jim now wants a tag with which to buy some grain. He comes to the committee and asks for it. Imagine this from the secretary. Well, Jim, you will owe us that tag, you know. You will repay us 1 year from today with interest at 10%. Can you hear Jim exclaim, how? Repay? Interest? What's next? What gives money value? The committee conclude that in this community there is a justification for making 30 tags back by cow, grain, shawl, goods. Absurdity of government borrowing. Now suppose that the committee find that after the various people have come in for tag to do their business, it still has, say, 15 tickets or tag lying idle. The municipal government needs 12 tag to build a sidewalk. Then what? Must the government borrow those 12 tag from the monetary committee? And must it pay the 12 back and with interest? Assume that it has thus taken and spent 12 tag. It now taxes Jim and his neighbor to pay interest. Then it taxes them to raise tag to repay the 12 back. Supreme justice. The sidewalk is for everybody. If the lumber and other material are all product of the community, and if the laborer all live there, why should the 12 tag not given to the government? The cow, grain, etc., the dentist's and blacksmith's energy and skill, the backing of the ticket, are all ready to honor the tag. If the government does not take the tag out and spend them, the tag, will lie idle. And if it takes them out, then they will be used to buy much of the goods and services otherwise lying unused. It will thus provide market and employment otherwise not available. These things make for the well-being, for prosperity. To have the government take the tag, debt-free, interest-free, and wisely disperse them, surely seems wisdom. To buy in an age of plenty cause production. But, warns a thoughtful one, what will happen when the tag come back and consume all of Jim Jackson's cow? The community will then have no good. Then what will happen to the tag? When a tag comes to Jim, he can destroy it. This he would do if he had made the tag, but if the committee made it, it would not be specifically a cow, grain, dentist tag, but a general tag of one cow's value, for example. When it comes to Jim now, he produces a new cow, having marketed the one, and the purchasing power, the tag, he turns over for coal, lumber, fish, wool, or any other community product he needs. If he has adequate soil, pasturage, building, breeding stocks, and skill, then to buy from him will be to make him produce promptly as much more. This principle, sound even long ago, is, in our age of plenty and speedy overproduction, an imperiously important money truth. Demand today creates its own supply. Effective demand creates its own supply. This is the last truth will need more elaboration. It must be appreciated if a modern thinker is to avoid utterly perversive error. The case today is almost the opposite of what it would have been, say, 75 years ago, in an age of comparative scarcity. Then supply created its own demand, a thing it cannot do today, so rapidly have matter moved. Even at the risk of tedium, let us use another concrete illustration. Suppose that all the Canadian made good at present in our storehouse and upon our shelf awaiting buyer are in a great classified heap, and that you are in charge of the heap. To complete the picture, imagine all the factory and industry which produce those goods and which stand ready to produce more good like them. Imagine these to be disposed around the heap, conveniently accessible to it, awaiting orders. Also around the heap, imagine Canada's 11 million of people, many of whom are painfully in need of the good upon the heap, yet unable to buy of the plenty before them. Until the goods are sold, distributed, it will be useless to add to the pile. It is your task to distribute so that the industry can produce more. The people's need we shall, for the moment, forget altogether. Money is the mean of distribution. For some time you have been giving out goods only to those who have offered you money. You have therefore learned that, no matter how much good a country has, no one can buy them without money. You cannot distribute without it, pardon me. In fact, goods, despite their real intrinsic value, despite the hard work, time, and money that went into their production, despite the fact that they are the only real wealth (stressed wearisomely by orthodox economists), despite all these reality, the good mainly appear practically worthless unless money comes for them. You have learned then a great truth. Goods almost worthless unless bought with money. You see a particularly needy woman, You make a tag with the word rubber written upon it. You send the tag to the woman with instruction that if she will return it to you, you will send her the pair of rubbers behind it. She returns it, you send her the rubbers, and dispatch the tag to the rubbers factory as proof that there is room on the pile for another pair. The factory accepts the tag as an order and immediately manufacture and forward a pair to replace those consumed. What can the factory do with the tag? The manager can give it to one of the worker who needs rubber. The worker will turn it to you for his requirement. He might, if he chooses, trade it to a fellow worker who wishes the footwear. Money is merely a special form of ticket. Suppose now that instead of writing rubbers upon the slip of paper you have written, a pair of rubber worth of good, then the factory would have been able to buy with it from the pile oil, machinery, raw material, or other commodity useful in its business. The manager may have given the claim to a worker who in this case would be able to buy the ticket's value of any kind of good on the pile: butter, meat, flowers, eggs. Money spent calls for production. If he claimed butter, the ticket would at once go to the creamery. Call forth more butter production, go to an employee, and return to the pile, this time for flour, say. As often as it went to the pile for good and it caused those goods to be consumed, they flitted the industry where it caused the same amount and kind of good to be produced, and then it went to labor to pay for services. Now let us assume you that use that you use not a ticket but a piece of paper with $1 written upon it. Then what? The paper will go back and forth from consumer to pile to factory to consumer indefinitely, as long as there are factory and resource and worker to produce and consumer to consume. You create in that dollar ticket another distributing agent to help you. You make it and can make it because they are in your pile. Goods that no dollar is calling for the rubbers, for instance. Needed number of dollar depend upon money works or exchange to be effected. How many tickets, dollar, can you and should you make? Anyone can readily see that the number of dollar necessary depends in large measure upon, first, the quantity and variety of the good upon your pile; second, upon the number and variety of factory around your pile or in your community, and the capacity of those factory to produce and deliver goods as, when, and where required. Third, upon the number of people range around the pile able and willing to use good. Fourth, upon the number of tickets already available to the people producing and consuming the goods of the pile. Fifth, perhaps upon the speed with which the tickets, dollar, change hands, that is, upon the velocity of circulation. Sixth, upon the variety, richness, and inexhaustibility, wow, of the resource behind the industry as well as upon their availability to the industry. Dollar not wealth, but essential to wealth. The dollars, whether you make them or whether they were already in the market, are purely medium of exchange, of distribution. They have no value except for the work they can do. But that work is so important that their presence adds value to the article on the pile. Without enough dollar, many of the article may even waste. Many other may be sold at so low of a price that the industry which produced them lose money. This will discourage production, even perhaps ruin those industries. Thus, while dollar are not wealth, dollar are made possibly by wealth, goods and services, and are absolutely necessary to wealth. This is an ill appreciated but indispensable money truth. The two great money illusion. This brings us naturally to a consideration of two great money illusion, one age-long, one exceptionally modern. 1. The first, much money is wealth. The first of the two Norman Angell calls the world's chief money illusion. This illusion is that money is wealth. For several centuries in Europe, the statesmen seemed to believe in something like what was called the mercantilist theory. They aimed to export all the good they could and to import not good but gold. Spain especially followed this belief. She accumulated practically mountains of bullion but became poor for it. Many individual and movement in history have become filled with the idea that if a state had more money, it would be more prosperous. That idea is fallacy. It caused, in part, the disaster of John Law's money and of the assignat en français, and of many of the colonial paper experiment in the United States. The second great money illusion, scarcity of money brings wealth. Record of these mishaps have scared statesmen and people alike into the opposite prejudice, that goods and services alone without money as effective demand coming to buy them are wealth. It could be true that the second illusion has done the world's people vastly more harm than the first. Each of these illusions leads to pitfall. Can we anyway clarify our thinking about them? Can we calm our strong feeling about them? Let's just try. Recall Jim Jackson's letter tag and the other tag which follow. Notice now: 1. The cattle were there, so were the grain and shawls. 2. So also were the men, A, desiring a cow, and B, willing to exchange for it grain or a shawl. So too was 3. Jim, A, desire for grain, and B, his willingness to exchange his cow for it. All 7 of these conditions had to be present before the tag could have worked. Wealth value of dollar illustrated. That cow, which Jim was inclined to dispose of for grain, was valuable in herself, in a general's way. She was goods, but her owner did not need to eat her, to milk nor work her, nor to make shoes from her skin. She was not for him, then, an immediately available consumable commodity. She would be about as useful to him as would be a second 1,000 bushels of wheat to a lone man on an inaccessible island. But to the shawlman, the cow doubtless was of instant service. The tag, just what part did it play? Did it add to the cow's worth? Clearly it did. Without the cow being there first, it would have been but an idle trinket. With her there first, and with the other condition as they were, the tag became almost as valuable as the cow herself. Because of it, she became of present value, A, to Jim, procuring him grain, B, to Mr. Grainman, procuring him one, a market without which his grain might have remained a drug on his hands; 2. Indirectly a shawl which he needed; and C. to Mr. Charlemagne, procuring him a market and a cow which he needed. The tag, then, unquestionably unquestionably added value to the cow, the grain, and the shawl, and beyond them to the pasture, the grain field, and the sheep. Furthermore, by providing markets, they obviously encourage production and so increase prosperity. Granted surplus good and service, new dollar add value to goods and our wealth. Dollars need only for exchange. Let us notice, before we turn from the problem, that the tag was needed only when Jim Jackson and Mr. Grainman needed to exchange without barter. If they had traded straight across cow for grain, there would have been no tag. If one could have worked for the other's commodity, no ticket would have been needed. Even if they could have arranged a three-corner barter, no medium would have entered into the transaction. An elaboration of other money truth which we have developed in this chapter, let us laying down that dollars are needed only when exchange or distribution are to be effected. Money, therefore, is primarily a mechanism for distributing the goods of the community. Importance of money grows with civilization and mechanization. It is important to bear in mind that all of the illustrations we have thus far used are drawn for very simple communities. In such, barter was the rule, money was little needed and relatively little used. If tag were so important in such neighborhood, how vastly more important are they, as dollar, in our highly complex neighborhood of today? How the need for dollar increase as grow the complexity of civilization can be gathered from considering the following figure, showing that what happened in the United States economy. In 1834, there were circulating $12.35 per capita. In 1860, there were $19.61 per capita. In 1880, there was $58.23. In 1900, there were 128.67. In 1915, there were 237.04 per capita, and in 1930, there were $515.33 per capita. There was most remarkable growth during the year from the 1860 forward. The amount of dollar almost doubled between 1900 and 1915, so 15 years, and more than double in the 15-year period from 1915 to 1930. The more we specialize it, it would appear, the more we use machine, the greater our money needs per capita. Hence, the more the money affects the value of real wealth, or good and services. In this chapter, we have dealt briefly with a number of matters which pertain to any community's money. We have observed and set down tentatively, several fundamental conclusions or money truth. 1. Money is a medium of exchange and a medium of distribution. 2. The value of money depends upon the good and service producing power of the people who create it and upon the exchange they wish to make. 3. Money tends to lose its value when there are coming into market more dollars than there are goods and service coming in those markets. This condition causes a rise in price called inflation. 4. Inflation is a rise in price resulting when there are in the market more dollars than there are goods and services for the dollar to buy at any given price level. 5. A community having good resource and efficient means of production resulting in goods and services can create its own money out of any substance it chooses. 6. Money need not be a debt either to the community as a whole or to the citizen of that community. 7. Interest on community created money is unjustifiable and unnecessary. 8. Governments borrowing in a general way in a properly managed community is an absurdity. 9. In a productive country equipped for abundant production, buying good or spending money cause more production. 10. In other words, effective demand, that is, people wanting good and having money to buy them with, create its own supply. 11. While goods and services are the only real wealth, they can be, and practically are, worthless unless they can be distributed, called for, or bought with money. 12. Thus, money, too, is an essential element in making up wealth. Its part must not be overlooked if disaster is to be avoided. 13. The number of dollars a community needs in its market depends upon the number of exchange of good and service its people must effect, that is, upon money work to be done. 14. There are two great money illusions. First, that money is the real purchasing power of wealth. Second, that goods and services alone are the real purchasing power of wealth. Both of these notions are genuine illusion. Both are in their effect upon us today pernicious. Sound money theory lies between these two extremes. 15. The importance of money in national well-being increase as civilization increase in complexity and in mechanization. The aim in this chapter has been to illustrate concretely these essential money truths. In succeeding pages, they will be enlarged upon and examined to find whether or not they can be successfully supported. Perhaps no one will refuse to accept our answer to the question, what is money? Much additional information bearing upon this answer will be adduced as we go forward. In the next three chapters, we shall consider in some detail the answer to three other questions, namely, what gives money value? How much money can people have? What do we now use for money? Without the answer to these, it is quite impossible for anyone to think effectively about monetary matter. So I'm returning the camera now because the recording is now over an hour. I think that's long enough for a part two, which I will be uploading in a few moments on my channel, maybe later on the SRPC. And what you get out of there is, yes, money alone has no value. It is directly in relation with what the people do, based on the resources that are available to them. Money itself is how could I explain that? How could I express that? It's a touchy business. It's very delicate. It's even taboo as it is to really speak about it. But without the human talking about monetary policy, which seemed that we have left it to the expert for the longest of time, we've had a problem. So because all fiat currency always end up to the intrinsic value, and that's why we've had so many monetary reform over the year. And when you use the printing press, as we've seen many times, which they discuss about in this chapter, without really having the value to absorb it in society, what you create in reality is first debt and second that leads to war. Every usage of the printing press over the 2,000 years of recorded human history have always asked for the debt, which is unpayable in money itself, to be paid with blood. And this is why I'm taking the time to read you this book so you understand where money comes from. At this point in time in history, I'm not too sure we're ready to live without money. But this is where we need to go, because otherwise it always leads to war and destruction. Because as we've seen it, we live in a world of plenty where everybody could have its minimum or its basic needs completely surrender, and we would never need to build more of certain thing like housing. At one point, if we discover a way to produce and build housing that lasts 1,000 years, do we still need to go about and build new housing every year? No, because they last. So this is why war comes around. So they destroy everything, then they is the human in general, so they can produce more. So we need to avoid that. I think we've lived that game so long enough that it needs to end. Insanity needs to end. How do you end up insanity? Well, you educate yourself and then you come up with a better idea knowing what the past is about so you don't repeat the same mistake. And one good example is John Law. That was an Englishman going to France, which was broken because our money was not based on gold or real labor, I should say, not necessarily gold. And they started printing money from the sky and printed more and printed more. What did happen in the end? Well, the people, they would trust that infantry button, you know, those buttons that you have on the tunic, were worth more than the dollar or a signa that came from the state, thus destroying the institution of the state. So, and it ended up in a revolution. So, and blood. Revolution may not be the right word. Bloodstream. So at this point in 2019, if we don't want to see a tidal wave of blood coming to us because there's never been that much money printed in the world out of nothing, we need an adjustment. And we need to think about how we're going to apply this adjustment. How money is going to be created in the future. If we let the private bank do it, it eventually returns to them, effectively stealing the wealth of the people, creating poor, thus justifying war. Because now you've got an army of poor people in the street doing nothing, an abundance of stuff which does not get sold because the people are too poor. So you blast everything and you start again. So let us avoid that together with common sense, common good intention. Think it and put it forward, and it's an utmost emergency. So thank you very much for watching today, or tonight, or whenever you watch it in a century from now. This broadcast, this book was written over 80 years ago, or close to 80 years ago, and no one cared. So we need to care now. So I'm gonna stop this. When we return, there's going to be a chapter 3. I am on page, what does it say? 46 of 64. So during this time, have fun, and I'll see you next time.